Yeah, I think we're recording right now.
Okay, cool. Um, Hi, I'm Isabel. I don't know if we're gonna do that. But I really liked the TED Talk and how she said that like you the last part of the TED Talk, she said a quote that really stuck with me, and it says you cannot oppress people that are not scared anymore. And it says that she also said that you cannot humiliate the person who feels pride. And that really reminded me of like the reading and how like just self-awareness and like what you think of yourself and like what you think that you are like capable of regardless of like your mental health, and like what you believe about yourself is more important than like anyone else, and like what you believe about yourself is like it's how people can treat you. Like if you believe that you are like good and like strong, if someone tells you you're not strong, then like that impact will be less. And so I thought those two quotes were really great. And so yeah.
I totally agree with that. I've like seen it kind of like over the course of my like mental health journey, but because I definitely am in like recovery, like the late recovery stages of having like serious mental health issues when I was younger and like even a couple years ago. But like from when I was a kid and like I hated my body and had a bunch of issues with myself and my confidence, like everything is harder and you're much more embarrassed all the time and like self-conscious. But now that I know that like, I'm not an awful person, it's like you never really like truly believe that. But now that I am more confident and I'm like, I know I'm good at my job and like I know I'm whatever else, like then no one else can tell you like that you're wrong. And it depends on the thing, obviously, but like when you are confident, then other people can recognize that confidence. And even if they doubt you, then you can be confident in your answer saying like, no, I know that I'm right, or like whatever.
Yeah, one thing that I wrote down that I liked from the TED Talk was she said it shouldn't be what's wrong with you, it should be what's happened to you. And I thought that was really cool because I was studying psychology before social work, and we learned about how childhood experiences like affect you into adulthood. So just that she brought that up and that she highlights that in her sessions, I thought was really important and cool.
I'll say overall, both the TED Talk and the reading is very educational. Just as like any other topic that we learn in this class, it's kind of new, you know. Um, Mental health in general is very stigmatized, I say, and specifically to like schizophrenia. Whenever I think of schizophrenia, I just think like a crazy person in my mind, you know, because that's all. That's almost like the extent of my knowledge, almost. But this TED Talk and the reading just like shows the different part and how the schizophrenia work and how it kind of like take over someone's mind and also their surroundings. When someone is diagnosed with schizophrenia, other people are starting treating them different, and their individuality kind of like dissipates slowly, and they're being treated like they're an illness, and that kind of like reinforce the negative cycle. So I mean, when like in both the reading and the TED Talk, I feel like both authors point out that like it's not that their disease is the main problem, but because they're diagnosed with their disease and because of how people treat them, because of that, they lose hope, they lose like a will, almost like to live, almost like they don't want to die, but they don't have no reason to live, and they feel lonely, they feel isolated, you know, all those things are a result of um, them being diagnosed. And yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I actually watched a video similar to this TED Talk whenever I was taking psychology. And the way that it was like they described schizophrenia and how it really affects people and how people view them really just gave me the insight and the knowledge more about how those different kinds of, I wouldn't say like I don't know what they would be classified as, but like things like that, those mental health things, like how they really affect the person and how they really take a big toll on them. And like the video that I watched before was talking about how schizophrenia would affect someone so much that it would cause them to go into depression, and how it will cause a bunch of suicide rates to go up in this one county. And like you just never really take the time sometimes to talk to those schizophrenic people, because we just think they were scary people and don't have the knowledge that they're not crazy, mentally insane people.
That reminds me of, I wrote down another quote from the TED Talk. She was talking about a doctor that said this to her, and it was, "Tell me about you, not what other people have told you about yourself." And like that goes along exactly what you said. Like, I think it's so important to like listen to those people who are, struggling with, maybe schizophrenia or whatever else like is going on in their minds. Like, I feel like it's so important to like make them know that like they're still a person. They're still like they said over and over again in like the reading, like they're a human being and they deserve to be listened to, like regardless of like what stigma or like what like connotation we like put on them. Like their like voice still deserves to be like heard, you know what I mean? Like we can't just like write them off because they have like schizophrenia or something like that. So I think it's just, and I think that can apply to really anybody, like of course like people who struggle with mental illness, but I think like everybody deserves to be heard about what they think of themselves rather than what they've been told their entire lives. So that was definitely a big theme that I got from both the TED Talk and the reading.
That it definitely reminds me of like, because mental illness like a lot of times is a disability, especially like not only like in terms of like I guess like social, I don't know, like when you think of a disability, but it's on the ADA too. It's not just like anyway, you guys know what I mean. But anyway, one of the concepts I'm learning in another class is that society handicaps people, and it's not the other way around, because like if we didn't treat people with disabilities, obviously like you have to treat them differently sometimes because it's what they require, and that's different than like treating them differently because they're just different from you. If you treat them differently, they're capable of everything that you are. It's just a little bit different. And so there's this really, really cool podcast from NPR that talks about this guy who's deaf, and he was never treated differently from the time that he was born, and he was adopted by his adoptive parents. And so he now like functions in society like pretty regularly. He can like, or maybe he's not deaf, he's blind, and he uses echolocation to like find his way around, so he clicks and stuff. But he can ride like a mountain bike, and he can do all these things that like sighted people can because he wasn't treated differently. And so the confidence, like it really, really changes the way that people live their lives, because if you are babying someone and like handicapping them, then you're denying them the experience of being like an independent human being. And that's what's more important than like being so worried about their safety that you're like sheltering them.
Yeah, and I feel like that goes back to like the mental health things, where if you treat them differently, then it makes them lose that confidence and insecure and all that kind of stuff, and could easily make them be like, oh, I'm not good enough and I'm not worth anything, and create that mental illness in them and depression and all that different things.
I also made a connection to this podcast I've seen before because I thought it was interesting. The article and the TED Talk brought up schizophrenia, and the podcast I listened to is this old FBI agent, psychiatric nurse, but she said in the 60s they would use schizophrenia as an umbrella term for anything they couldn't really diagnose. So then just that too, like people being stigmatized or put in groups that they're really not necessarily in, just to kind of get them out of society. They've been doing that since the 60s and even before. It's crazy.
Yeah, kind of going off of what y'all were saying. Yeah, one thing that really stood out to me in the reading is when the author says, as I watch her, I know it is not so much mental illness that I am observing. I am witnessing the flame of a human spirit faltering. So it's like it's not the illness that is causing the main problem. You know, it's the humans around them and the messages that she received. And the author did mention, you know, um, it is like dangerous time, and you got to make sure to not succumb to those messages, and make sure you have like strong inner voice to keep you going, because yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, that's kind of like the main takeaway that I took away from both these things is that like it's so important for these people and really anyone, but like for the sake of this discussion, like for them to like value themselves because like I don't know, like my whole life I've like been told the metaphor like you can't be like they're like a teacup and if you're not being poured into you can't like pour anything out like if you're not being poured into with like love or like support or like anything then like you're not going to be able to overflow onto anybody else around you and like I think it's so important for these people like if they are like have a struggle with like mental illness or like anything like that like it's so important for them to have a support system because there's like so many stories of like people like that could have had a chance but like didn't have anyone to like believe in them or like value them or like tell them that they're worthy or like anything like that and then like their lives were just so much worse because of that so I think it's just that was my main takeaway from like both of these is that the I think it was the reading but like just that recovery is like a process and like these people don't need to be like normal or like have gotten better for us to like think that they're worth listening to or helping you know what I mean like they're worth listening to and like helping like even if they're in the midst of like you know the biggest mental breakdown or whatever is going on in their lives like we don't have to wait for them to get normal I think the reading talks about that is that it's not about getting normal because like recovery is a whole process you know what I mean so that was really what I got from that.
I definitely agree. Obviously, but recovery is like a really, really long process. Like it takes, I don't know how much you guys have experience with mental illness versus, you know, not having experience, but I don't think I know anyone who I'm that close with who doesn't have mental illness. And so it's so normalized in my life that I just kind of like, that's just how I like where I'm at. So I know how to deal with it really well, but like the recovery process can take years and years and years, and even if you recover then you can relapse again like no matter where you're at in life. And so it's like so important to keep tabs on people and like check in on them and like you said like overflow into them because you never know where someone's at. Like I hate the whole thing on like Twitter and like social media that's like you don't owe anyone anything like blah, 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 because even if you don't owe someone something, don't you have empathy? Like can't you can reach out to people without them reaching out to you first because it's not always about being selfish. You can like you can do that. I guess but also like you know similar but different is that recovery like is I don't know, it's I feel like it's celebrated, but the work that you take to get there, like the people don't talk about it very often. And so like it's still like very stigmatized, I guess. Like people don't want to talk about like the nitty-gritty and like the hard parts and the like they want to like empathize with you about depression, but not when you like haven't cleaned your room in 3 weeks and like you can't get out of bed to like do anything. And so it's interesting to see like I'm glad these two stories were I thought they were obviously they're very similar, but the way that they were both like privileged in a way to be able to have that support and treatment because a lot of people don't. I think the statistic is like it's like 50-60% of people with mental illnesses are undiagnosed and don't seek help even though they know that something's wrong. And usually it's because either of like the stigma, people don't not believing it's real, which is surprisingly a lot of people don't believe mental illness is real, and also because they can't afford to like seek help or there's nowhere near them. And so like it's important that these success stories are heard so that we can reach out to the people in need who really are like don't have a support system.
And I also think it's important to be educated on this kind of topic, because if we don't know, then we're gonna see it as everyone else, and with the limited knowledge that we have about a certain thing, then our action gonna reflect the amount of knowledge we have. And the more knowledgeable we are, the more we can tune our actions that is most constructive for both for us and for others, and for the person who is diagnosed with the illness, let's say. So yeah, I think it's very important that we we try our best to educate ourselves in these kind of topics, and be open-minded. Um, yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes I think too, like people are really good at hiding what's going on in their life, and nobody knows like what's actually happening. Because like I had someone who was close to me in my family where he acted perfectly fine, and everything. He had a perfect and healthy, good relationship with the kids and everything. And then he tried to commit suicide, and nobody, because he hadn't talked to nobody, nobody had reached out to him, and they just never took the time to actually get to understand if he was going through something, and he just didn't tell anybody for it. So
Yeah, I definitely think it's important to be educated on like sensitivity, because I know my parents personally, they don't believe in mental illness. So if I ever asked for help growing up, they would be like, "Oh, well, you can change your mindset. Like you're just sad, you're just like shy." And it really like makes you feel like your problems aren't valid when people treat it like, "Oh, mental illness isn't real." So being sensitive is definitely like a huge part of it. And also something that I liked from the TED Talk was how she kind of learned to dissect her thought distortions and make herself feel better. I did write that down too when she was talking about how to learn to help yourself. So it's a big thing.
I think we all just answered the question that was like, how do you think the information will help us in our future practice as helping professions? Because I think like the best thing anybody can do is just be like informed and like at least try to be educated on like, what people are going through, and especially as like a helping professional, like, and even I think it says a more informed community member. That's kind of like an easy answer, but like the only answer is to be more informed, like is to like go after like an education and like go after like learning more about these people's situations and what they're going through, and like you said, like how to like say the right terminology, and like not give in to like the stigma that you've heard your whole life or like from our parents or anything like that, is like to make our own decisions on like what people are going through and not let anybody else influence like how we treat anybody, but more so people with like mental illness. So
Going off of what you say as well, on the importance of being informed, is that, I mean, I think most people will agree, especially, I mean, in my culture, I see it all the time. They just brush off like mental illness. If you have like you, it's almost as if there's like nothing in between. You're either crazy or you're normal, especially in my culture at least. So that just goes to show that like lack of information can create result like that. The more you understand about a specific illness, the more open you're going to talk about it, and the less stigma that will attach to that specific illness. So yeah.
That's interesting that you bring up your culture too, because I know a few different like people, I guess, like people of color who have that same experience. Like I was close to someone who was Mexican, and her family did not believe in any of that stuff at all and completely ignored it, even though it was clear that multiple members of her family were experiencing like depression and anxiety, and she herself was also experiencing it and denying it, which was so frustrating. But like you have to, like, again, like with working with like clients and whoever you're working with in the future, like sometimes that's just not where they come from, and so you can't blame people who weren't raised that way, like to believe that, or not to necessarily not believe in it, but just like that it is such something that you can talk about, because a lot of the time it's like you don't talk about it, and that's why like people, like you said, the someone who like commits suicide because they don't talk about it. um I had something else to say. There's also mental health first aid training now. And so it's just like, I guess, like CPR first aid training, but it's for mental health crisis. And so it can be used for like youth, and there's like youth and adults, but like in my field, like that happens at least like once or twice every summer. We have a kid who has like some severe mental health crisis, and we have to help them get down, and we're not therapists, so that's something that like you guys or like whoever could do, that's not a PhD, that's not like a psychiatrist, to help like someone that you're working for or someone that you just like, I guess, see on the street. That doesn't really happen often, but you never know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
well,
brings
sorry.
me. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I've talked a lot.
I was just going to say, going off what you said though too about how it helps in the profession. I feel like a lot of people just don't want to talk about it, like they're ashamed of it and don't want to come to terms with them being depressed or having anxiety, and so they keep it to themselves. And so having that support system and letting them know that, hey, a lot of people actually go through the same thing as you. You're not by yourself. You're not alone. Helping them have that system will help prevent them going further or committing suicide, or helping them come out.
Sorry, I cut you off earlier. It just sparked in my mind, like, I think another answer to that question was like, even if you're not going through something like yourself, like you're personally struggling with something, like I think it's important to, like, one, like if you know someone in like your close like family or something like that. Like my mom is bipolar. She was like diagnosed when I was in kindergarten, so it's like I've grown up with someone who really struggles with this. And I think it's important like to not just offer support for people who are like personally going through it, but it's like someone who like is personally affected by it, if that makes sense. So I think like that is like something that you just sparked in my mind, like when like you don't have to have like a degree to like, offer support and like be there to help, if that makes sense, especially to like people who maybe not be going through it like personally. But I don't know, I just think, and that reminded me of what you said earlier, like you don't owe anything to anybody, but like it doesn't hurt to, be kind when you can, or like when you feel like, it's needed. And I think it's always needed, but I don't know, that was just a whole little tangent that my mind went to.
Yeah, I'm really big about empathy. And so like in my mind, like it's just another part of capitalism that has trickled down into social media and trickled down into like our personal lives, is that like this is like one of the most basic things you can say in like a psychology class, but we are individualists and we are not collectivists, and a lot of other countries are collectivists. And so that's why America struggles so much more with things like this than other countries do, is because we only care about ourselves, not like us personally, but like as a whole. It's like, why, like when you see online, it's like, why is this, like, I can't think of a good example. It's like, why is this more accessible than this? And it's like, well, the real question is that why aren't they both accessible? Like, why is insulin $1,000 and like it doesn't have to all be put against each other. Like it can be like, these are two separate problems that we can solve. We don't have to like, anyway.
Another perspective that I want to mention is the idea of being tough. Like especially, I mean girls too, but guys, like you're told to be tough, not to show your emotions. Um, it's not like it's like we're a different being, like we're alien or something. We have emotions, right? And we go through all the things that girls might be going through. Who knows? But we definitely go through things, but we don't share it because it make you quote unquote weak. And maybe that's why there's like, I think there's like a higher level of suicide among men than women. So that's bad. And on the topic of mental illness and mental health, I think that's important, because if you don't share anything, then how you're just gonna stay tough and bury it forever? I don't think so. It's gonna get to you one day, and it's gonna be bad. So I mean, it's more or less a wishful thinking on my part, that I want all male to start sharing their emotions and be more vulnerable to one another. And it's gonna take it's gonna take like a long time from now until that that happened, if it ever will. But that would be like more ideal and more constructive and more helpful and healthy for men, for both men and women. And to not think of like going through this problem as quote unquote weakness, because it's not. We all go through it. Just because you hide it doesn't make you tough, you know. So it just make you struggle more.
Absolutely. I definitely see that like in the whole like men are more aggressive thing, because it's not like that's a generalization, but the root of the generalization is that like I think that it's all obviously all rooted in the fact that they can't like, because men are raised not to show their emotions, then they don't know how when they're older, and so then they become aggressive or they become like more suicidal. I think that you're right that that is a statistic that like more men commit suicide than women, and there's like specific like things and within that, but it's just interesting to see like the cause and effects of everything, like the big wide web of like things in the whole world and like gender roles and like whatever else. But just the aggression that it causes. I don't know. Every time I talk to a man and they're talking about something, I'm like, you need a therapist, and not in like a mean way, but like you need to go to therapy. Everyone needs to go to therapy. Like,
Yeah, I'm a sociology major. This is what I've basically been studying for the past like 4 years now. It's just how like society pushes people to do like things, and sometimes people write it off as this one guy has an issue talking about his feelings, and then I'm like screaming inside, and I'm like, well, no, it's been like this for a long time, and like a lot of people have been like socialized to be this way, and like that's not an excuse, but like there's just more to this story, like we can't like just write it off as like one bad guy who doesn't want to talk about his feelings. But I think what I'm like understanding, because I feel like we can wrap it up soon, is that like everyone, like man, woman, whatever, like everybody, and can just like benefit from removing the stigma from mental illness, and treating people with empathy and kindness, and allowing them to be so that they know that they are worthy and that they can be listened to, and mental illness does not have to define them. So I think that's what we were all talking about today, and what I'll take away from this discussion for sure. I think we're good. We're done. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're good. Okay, I'll stop
Okay,
recording.
thanks.